Okay, hello, how are we doing? Good to see you this morning, this afternoon, tonight, whenever you're watching this. We're going to continue our discussion about Napoleon. This week you're going to have a Napoleon quiz on Friday. I'm also going to give you a short reading on the French Revolution that will be on that quiz as well. So make sure you're sort of following along here and thinking about the big events and the major people in Napoleon's life and the places he was. All right, so here we go. Let us continue. Let me do a little brief review of something here. Let me just go back. I asked you to. I've sort of been asking you to look up some things along the way, and one of the things I asked you to look up was the Jacobins, if you recall this, and I said, those Jacobins were highly influenced by Rousseau. And of course, Rousseau is one of these guys who is, he's one of these guys who's a philosopher of the Enlightenment. So what I'd like you to do is just briefly grab that, okay? Grab your stuff you wrote down about the philosophers. And I wanted to just sort of comment about, these are guys who appear to be anti, sort of king. And how did Rousseau get a bunch of people to go this far to get to the Reign of Terror? And to influence somebody named Marx, who we'll see very soon. Marx is, and those who follow the policy of Marx, some of the greatest really killers of history. Okay, so we're back here, and if you look at the very last page of, if you take a look at the very last page we did of the Philosophers, I hope you recall this. And part of the point that I was trying to make with this whole thing is that before the Philosophers, you had every king and every oligarch claim they ruled by divine rights. God gave them the right to rule. And then you had this oligarchy, a small group of people that supported the king, the royal family, the nobles, even a parliamentary group. And then who's left? Just what do we have at the bottom? We have the regular folks. And the philosophers come along and say, no, God, yes, exists. And you can see they live in a Roman Catholic, Christian world at this time, Protestant world. Okay, but who's next after God? It's you. And then you have the right to choose how you are governed. And you have the right to choose the laws and the types of things that you would like to have in your life. So what I want to add to this then is I want to add how about I put it like this? I'll just call it a Rousseau point of view, POV. Okay? And his is even a little bit different still. And what I would say is that Rousseau came along and he said, okay, I will grant you that there may be a God, but who's really at the top? You. You're at the top. And what's beneath you is God and everyone else. Regardless of whether they're in the government or whatever, it's everyone else besides you. You are in control of your own destiny. Now you may say, okay, well, I can sort of see how that makes sense. You should be free to be in control of your own destiny. Well, what this really is, you should keep in mind here, something else we need to ask ourselves, is this really good, is this concept of moral relativism. Okay? Now, when you have a system like this in which you have some sort of religion or something that you perceive as greater than yourself, as the philosophers claim, okay, as the philosophers said, look, there's you, but there's something greater than you, and there's something that we should, as individuals, understand that there may be something greater than us, and therefore can give us a guide to how life should be lived. Rousseau said, no, there's nobody that can tell you or be your guide to life. You should do what you feel. You should be your own, you should make your own morality. Don't let something else, some other institution, some alleged God determine your morality, what is right and wrong. You believe in within yourself what you think is right and wrong. So if it's moral relativism, it's all relative is the concept behind that. And you can see, I hope, that when you have a situation in which morals are not determined by something that many people agree, okay, there's lots of people that got to the point that agreed that there's a moral something basis or a right and wrong basis, even laws to live by. The philosophers, led by this particular philosopher, convinces a group of people that no, we're going to determine our morals as we go. We are not going to take something from the outside. We are going to determine it as we see fit, as the time, at the particular moment, at the particular time we see fit. And here you can see maybe how this can sort of spiral out of control, where there's no moral code, there's no law code. We're going to do it as we go along based on how we feel. All right, so that's sort of a short, simple explanation maybe for how this got to be where it got. Okay? All right, so let's continue on with our discussion of Napoleon, and you saw that I had it right about here. I did want to do one other thing. There is a legend. Here we go, number 14. If you recall, number 14 was talking about how Napoleon and his French army were in Egypt, and they discovered the Rosetta Stone. His troops discovered the Rosetta Stone, and they were subsequently defeated by the British and had to hightail it out of there, and the Rosetta Stone fell into the possession of the British. Now, there's a legend that says that the French troops were responsible for this. Not the building of this thing, but I think you all recognize this. This is the famous Sphinx of Egypt. The Sphinx of Egypt is right out in front of the three great pyramids. It's right in front of the middle one, the Khafre pyramid. But one of the great things is whatever happened to the nose of the Sphinx. Well, legend has it that French troops are responsible for this, and that a couple of guys who were manning cannon, they were French cannoneers, had a contest to practice their accuracy, if you will, and one of them said to the other, I bet you can't hit the face of that statue right over there. And supposedly a French cannoneer shot his cannon and hit the Sphinx right in the face and knocked its nose off. Okay, so this is I don't know if it's an urban legend, but this is not necessarily the case. There is a very good case to be made that the Sphinx's nose was knocked off hundreds of years before by the armies of Muhammad. As Muhammad and the armies of Islam marched across northern Africa, when they came to Egypt, one of their first stops, they discovered that local Egyptians were still worshiping the Sphinx. And the Muslims came through and they said, no, can't do that anymore. There was only one true God. So what did the Muslim army do? They defaced the Sphinx. Okay, so this notion that the French did it, there's evidence to say, oh, no, that's totally incorrect. Okay, so let's continue as we go through this whole thing. We'll make some notes, obviously, as we go along. If you recall, despite the fact that, number 14, despite the fact that Napoleon was not successful in England, he was able to turn that around, and basically the reign of terror was just completely out of control. France had fallen into anarchy. Napoleon had already been sort of picked as a leader in the government, and he came back from Egypt when he realized things were completely out of control and seized power. Okay, that's number 14. And he seized government power, and he becomes basically, for lack of a better way of putting it, singular ruler. Okay, now let me sort of continue through this number 15. I want to talk about number 15 and some other things along the way. You'll notice that Napoleon loved to copy history. So one of the things he does is he invades Italy and he crosses the Alps. Now, I don't know if you got because of my absences last year, if you got the story of Hannibal. Hannibal was a famous general from a city-state called Carthage during the Roman era. And Hannibal invaded the Italian peninsula with elephants by crossing the Alps mountains. They came from Spain north of Italy, crossed into Italy over the Alps mountains. So what did Napoleon do? Napoleon wanted to imitate that. He did the exact same thing. He liked to do things, repeat things in history. So that's number 15. Okay, we're on to the next page, number 16. Here's something you might find interesting. He was distrustworthy of Jews. He saw Jews as a group of people that was more loyal to their religion and their ethnic group rather than the nation that they were from. And so he said Jews are sort of like a nation within a nation. He wanted them to assimilate and become stronger French citizens. You can see a famous quote here, number 17, about he would, I think that I've included this quote just to sort of let you see how this guy was willing to do whatever it took. How's that sound? All right. Number 18, he had some thoughts about the roles of women in society. These seem sort of contradictory because on one hand you see at the end of this how he's open to women being part of the military force, even being in combat roles, but you can see he believes that they also have other, I don't want to say, let's just say they have other roles he believed. Okay? And so what I wanted to get to specifically, especially today, was number 19 and number 20. And that is this famous event in December 1804 involving Napoleon. And this is also going to be part of your picture. And this is a famous ceremony that he has set up in Paris in which he becomes the Emperor of France. Now, this happens... let's see, again, this is a story, maybe you recall the story of Charlemagne. In 800 AD, Charlemagne was the leader of a group of barbarians, a Germanic group called the Franks. And the Franks they controlled France, what we today call France, what they called Gaul. And the Pope at that time was a guy named Pope Leo. And Pope Leo decided that the Roman Catholic Church needed an army to back up its desires with certain kings or leaders who wouldn't do what the Roman Catholic Church did. So what the Pope did, Pope Leo, he had a special ceremony in which he crowned Charlemagne the leader of something called the Holy Roman Empire. And if you recall that old story, the Holy Roman Empire, the formation of that began the historical debate between church and state, the struggle between church and state that we deal with still today. And I used examples like abortion. There is a political side to the abortion question, and there's a religious, a church side to the subject of abortion. Okay? Now, the Pope crowned Charlemagne. So, that was 800 AD, something called the Holy Roman Empire. This thing right here ends the Holy Roman Empire. This is a famous picture of Napoleon, okay, at this famous ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral. Here is the Pope. His name is Pope Pius II right here. And the story goes is that the Pope was invited to come up to France and crown Charlemagne. Well, if you recall the story of Charlemagne, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne to imply, I'm greater than an emperor. I can crown an emperor. Okay? Remember that whole business? So the Pope was saying, I'm the most powerful person in Europe. All right, so at this event, Pope Pius picks up, and he knows right when he's supposed to do it, and Pope Pius picks up this crown, and he's about to crown Napoleon, and guess what Napoleon does? Napoleon grabs it out of his hands and crowns himself. Why would Napoleon do something like that? Napoleon would do something like that to imply, no, there's nobody greater than the emperor. I am the greatest. I am the most powerful person in Europe. So, what is this scene called? Well, this scene is called, ladies and gentlemen, Napoleon crowning Josephine. Now, this should go back to something that we did a moment ago. We did earlier. Where is she? Here she is. I asked you to look up this person right here. Here she is. This is Josephine de Beauharnais. Josephine was Napoleon's first wife. Okay? Now, here is the Pope. Okay? Here is Napoleon's mother, Letizia. Even though in this painting she's there, apparently Letizia refused to go to this ceremony. She hated Josephine. Josephine's first husband was killed by the guillotine during the Reign of Terror. Their romance, Napoleon loved Josephine completely. Here is a closer up shot. This is on the back side. You can see Napoleon with the crown about to put it. He's already been crowned, and he's putting sort of a Roman emperor type crown. He's about to crown Josephine right there. Okay? Okay. They say that his father had passed away by this time. Napoleon's father. I sort of discussed the clashes that he had with his father. I would just sort of list this as Emperor Napoleon. Apparently, he had many brothers and sisters, and mostly brothers. And he said, "Boy, if Father could see us now, he wouldn't believe it." I'm sure that is completely 100% true. Okay. All right. So as we sort of continue forward with this whole thing, we'll get to number 20. Look, this crowning business that he does this really sort of jibe to you with, does this sort of go along with the idea of the French Revolution? I mean, does this sort of make sense to you? This is sort of odd, isn't it? France had a king, and they fight a revolution to get a king, to get rid of the king, and what do they end up with? They end up with an emperor. What's the difference between a king and an emperor? Well, not much. There are slight differences, I guess you could argue, but for general purposes, they're both dictators, and they are all powerful, and those are the exact same. Wasn't that exactly what the French Revolution was fought to get rid of? Apparently not, because that's what they end up with. And ironically enough, Napoleon was very popular. We will see extremely popular as emperor. So this is all these types of things. Number 21 sort of talks about that, about again how he was similar to people of history. He wanted to be similar to people of history. I list Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. Those two guys did not have, like, for example, constitutions that had some sort of control over them. Napoleon is the same way. And as he becomes more successful militarily, he decides that he wants to expand the French borders, and that's exactly what he does. And we can see that as this is going to go along, number 23 is a discussion about the big thorn in the French side, and the most difficult nation that is going to need to be overcome is going to be the British. And so that's number 23. And so he begins to draw plans to eventually invade the British Islands. And so he's going to do anything he can to weaken the British. And so this is 24 and 25. And I'm talking about Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, by just after 1800, this is 1803, Thomas Jefferson is the President of the United States, the young new nation of the United States. Okay? Now, you, I think, know this, and that is that in 1803, the French, Napoleon specifically, sells a huge chunk of land in North America to the United States. And this land was called, this big parcel of land is called, number 24, the Louisiana Purchase. Okay? So even though my point here with writing this about number 25, Thomas Jefferson hated him, and that is that Thomas Jefferson was a revolutionary himself. But Thomas Jefferson was no Napoleon. Thomas Jefferson was, as I write here, anti-dictatorship, whereas Napoleon, we see, is very much pro-dictatorship. Okay, so even though they do this deal, which is certainly controversial in and of itself, even though they do this deal, Jefferson is no fan of Napoleon, and I'm sure vice versa. Okay, so number 26 is a very important part of this whole story. And that is, as he conquers across Europe, Napoleon that is, he makes sure that every European nation agrees to something called the continental system. Okay? And so this is number 26. And basically what all of these conquered nations are forced to do is sign a treaty with the French, basically saying, we are not going to trade with England. We are not going to trade with the British Empire. In other words, Napoleon is trying to, what I call, blockade, okay, England. Now we think of a blockade like laying siege to a city. A blockade is kind of like laying siege using your navy to blockade a harbor. But in this case, the idea is to blockade an entire nation, the entire nation of England. And by stopping trade to England, what are you in essence doing? You're not declaring military war. You're really declaring economic warfare, and that's exactly what this is all about. Okay? And so we see that this is his big attempt after numerous military victories to solidify his power. This is number 26, obviously, to solidify his power. Number 27, basically, what I would like you to add something here. Number 27 is called the, maybe I'll just write it in here, just on my own. 27 is called the Napoleonic Code. All right, you can see that this is exactly what he is trying to do. I don't know if you really got this last year. Alexander the Great tried to do something like this. He had something called a one world concept where he implied laws and governing systems and even a common language over this huge empire that he had conquered over vast territories. So here you have Napoleon again trying to copy somebody from history, in this case Alexander the Great. And what would be the great capital of this great European nation, this European empire, this French empire that covers the vast majority of the European continent? Number 28, Paris would be the capital city of this great, big, humongous empire. Okay, so what do you need to invade England? What do you need? You're going to need a navy, because obviously England is an island. You've got to get your forces from the continent to the island of the British Islands. Okay. Remember, the French are not the first to do this. Okay. Hopefully you recall in the late 1500s under Queen Elizabeth II, the Spanish, the English are able to fight off an invasion by Spain. Spain built a huge navy and invaded England, and they were caught in a bad storm, and then the quicker British Navy decimated the Spanish, changing the really the balance of power in the world from Spain to England. Okay, so this famous event is number 29, in which the attempt by the French to eventually invade England is dashed, and the French will never be able to invade England because of this devastating defeat at the hands of the British off the coast of Spain in October 1805 at the infamous, if you're French, and famous if you're British, Battle of Trafalgar, or Trafalgar. I'm going to call it Trafalgar. And this is really sort of, I would say, the first major defeat. This is the first major defeat of any French force. Okay? Now, the person you should know about in this event is this man right here. Okay? This is a famous statue of this famous admiral, British admiral. His name was, this is a closer up picture of it, his name was Horatio Nelson. Okay? You can see that Nelson has no right arm. His right arm was blasted off in a previous battle, but he was considered their greatest one of their greatest military minds, and still to this day considered one of the great military minds of British history. This place in downtown London is called Trafalgar Square. It's a pretty cool area where people go and hang out. There's a big bunch of statues of lions all the way around it. And Trafalgar Square is one of these really super cool places. All right, and so this event is crucial and critical in the story of Napoleon. And so Nelson is somebody we should all definitely keep in mind and never forget about. Horatio Nelson. Okay, so let's continue here just for a few more moments. Maybe let's do one more here as we get to the very end of this. We're on the third page now. We're number 30. Okay, I'm just going to go through number 31. How's that? And then I'll be done for the day for Napoleon number 2, part 2. Okay, number 30. You know, when you have a big, huge empire, it's tough. It's hard to maintain. This is proven throughout history, whether it's the Romans, whether it's Alexander the Great, whether even the ancient Egyptians, whether it's the Chinese. In modern history, certainly, Napoleon is a great example. Even the Nazi Empire of World War II, you could even make an argument, the Communist Empire of the 20th century. These things are difficult to maintain, and eventually they are beaten back. And one of the places, number 30, where there was particular difficulty for the French was in Spain, their neighbor to the southwest. The French invaded Spain, but this was not glorious big battles. This was nasty, ugly, guerrilla-style warfare, hit and run, and the Spanish decimated French forces. The British were all over Spain, helping the Spanish as well as this went along. Okay, now number 31 is where I will pick it up tomorrow, and the most infamous part of the story of Napoleon, and it has to do with the Russians basically breaking the continental system, which I described to you a moment ago. Napoleon finds out, and Napoleon and the Tsar of Russia had met face to face to deal, back up here, number 26. The Tsar of Russia and Napoleon met face to face to agree to this treaty. All right. Well, the Russians break the treaty basically, and they are secretly trading with England. And Napoleon gets wind of it, and this is what number 31 says: is that Napoleon decides he's going to punish the Russians, and he is going to invade Russia, of all things, if you can imagine. That's exactly what he's going to do. Okay? All right, so here we go. Your thing to look up today. All right? Here's your thing to look up today. You were supposed to look up Josephine. We decided she was the first wife of Napoleon. This is what I would like you to look up today. Here is your extra thing to look up. I want you to look up the Nelson touch. Okay? The Nelson touch. All right? That's your item to look up today. All right, folks, that's it. That's the end of Napoleon Part 2. And you will get Napoleon Part 3 tomorrow. All right, I hope you enjoyed the story. This very fascinating story, like I said. And then next week we'll get into the discussion of Hitler, and you were on the lookout for similarities between Napoleon and Hitler. All right? All right, very good job, students. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Aloha.